after the success of My Neighbour Totoro over here, we have the next stage adaptation of a Ghibli film, this time it being a production that originated in Japan, being transferred over here and still being performed in the original Japanese. It's really interesting to see this compared to something like My Neighbour Totoro, which obviously for a lot of us who are being introduced and learning to love Ghibli films through their stage adaptations is our number one point of comparison. So, what is the difference between the two? Did one work better than the other? Let's find out. But if you haven't seen my face before, hi, I'm Ellie, I talk about theatre. I am the most chaotic theatre person on the internet. I do reviews, I do discussions, I do video essays, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. But let's talk a little bit about Spirited Away. Spirited Away is based on the film of the same name by Studio Ghibli. It is a much darker tale than Totoro, but nonetheless, it still captures a similar style, a similar point of like imagination and weird otherworldly creatures interacting with a human. This time, the otherworldly creatures are not so thrilled about the humans, but we'll move on. As we see 10-year-old Chihiro adapt to this world to try and save her parents who have been turned into pigs by the spirits who inhabit this bathhouse. It is a beautiful film. Out of the Ghibli films I've seen, which I must admit is a limited number, it is probably my favourite. I think it's the world it brings you into. The storyline is really well done and well paced. And you really get a sense of the scale of this world. And some of that, all of that animation is gorgeous. And it's so creative. And you really get a sense of the different types of spirits that inhabit this world. Now, Totoro was a very faithful adaptation. And to say that this continues that trend would be correct. This is almost entirely the film on stage. And, you know, when we're talking about adaptation, I am a person who likes to see some things adjusted. Film and theatre are two very different mediums, and some things that work on film don't necessarily work on stage. The thing about this is that with something that is already quite imaginative, like Ghibli films in general, and especially Spirited Away, I can kind of make an exception for this. Especially because I don't think it needs much change in adaptation. I think the story is already deliciously dark. I think it already kind of pushes the boundaries of where you want to go. Maybe if I was tasked to this, I would restructure a couple of things, just pacing-wise. But other than that, I don't think it needed to change much. So it being a faithful adaptation is not a bad thing. What is interesting for this is that I think that for an audience who is less familiar with Studio Ghibli, which is always going to be a possibility when you're bringing a show to a different country, a lot of people who go and see these are not going to be the biggest Ghibli fans. Of course, there are going to be some people, and this is always going to be tailored towards them. But it is interesting to see a production that was initially designed for a Japanese audience who all are going to know a Ghibli film, and taking that to London, where people in general aren't as culturally aware of the property. And performing it in the original Japanese makes it a little bit of an adjustment for you as an audience member to balance between the surtitles, the official term for the subtitles, because it is technically in an opera house, and the actual production on stage. This is much easier if you have watched the film. I am so glad that I fully watched the entirety of Spirited Away a couple of days before I went, because it meant that the surtitles were really easy for me to balance with watching the full production, which is so gorgeous that you barely want to take your eyes off it for too long. The surtitles are placed in 3 places on the stage. Wherever you sit in this auditorium, there will be some surtitles that you can see. On each side of the wall, there are surtitles, and there are some above for the people in the higher tiers of the theatre. So often, especially if you're somewhere like in the stalls, you may find yourself looking towards the stage in front of you and then slightly towards the side to catch the surtitles and juggle that. And that is a lot easier if you know the general story. I think that if you're going into this not aware of Spirited Away, if you're going into this as a newbie or someone who appreciates other Ghibli films or likes My Neighbour Totoro and wants to see this, I would recommend watching the film. I think it's almost necessary to watch the film before you see Spirited Away on stage. I think it definitely was a massive help for my experience as someone who does not speak Japanese and barely even knows a single word of Japanese, to be able to better balance the enjoyment of actually seeing what's happening on stage and being able to understand what's happening on the subtitles. Or subtitles. Damn it, I've already messed up. But on the whole, it's a very direct adaptation. And I think that this is not a negative because of the fact that already Spirited Away is a very creative show. Even from the film, it's so creative and imaginative with the animation style. And there's so much within that you can just take from that design and make it and put it onto stage. And they really do. Let's talk about the stagecraft in general because, oh my god, it is gorgeous. There is so much here to enjoy. There's nothing as big, I will say, as the puppetry in My Neighbour Totoro, but there's a lot more. There's the different types of spirits. There's the radish spirit, which is always my favorite. I love the little radish. I love the giant radish spirit. He's just a silly little big guy. And there's so many different techniques used within this and within the traditional Japanese style of theatre making that really, really work. I think the Japanese style of theatre making is so gorgeous and so well done. It's very physical. It's very puppetry based. There's a lot of choreography in here and all of it feels very authentic. Probably because it is. But I think a lot of the enjoyment of this adaptation and what you get out of seeing it on stage is answering the question, how? Because I know that when I was watching the film, knowing that in a couple of days I was about to see this on stage, my question was, how? How are they going to do this? How are they going to flood an entire stage? How are they going to do the dragon? How are they going to do Yubaba turning herself giant? How are they going to do the fact that she's a twin? There's so much in there that you question, how are they going to do this? And it is honestly such a joy to see how they achieve it. Everything that is in the film is presented on stage in a really cool and interesting way. Mostly with puppetry, but with some other theatrical techniques baked in there for the joy of the experience. I think with a production like this, especially when you know that this was originated in Japan, and knowing how important this story and this film is to a lot of people in Japan, it makes sense that it is accurate to that original film. But let's talk a little bit more generally about some of the puppetry that they use. I will be speaking from now about some further details. If you want to go in completely blind to this, I will be speaking about some details on the puppetry and what type of thing they use. Some of the best puppetry comes from creating the less human creatures in the show, like the dragon version of Haku, which is made of this giant flowing puppet handled by about 3 or 4 puppeteers, split into 3 or 4 different sections, which all create this wave and this movement of this dragon flowing like this. A bit like that. And this also works for when it needs to reform back into Haku, as the pieces can be easily detached from each other to really quickly flow you from dragon to spirit, god, person. Yes. And also this being done in sections also means that Chihiro can indeed ride the dragon, which was a little, I enjoyed that. That's quite joyful. I like the fact that they planned that puppet specifically so that she can ride it. And it's even better because she rides it on the shoulders of one of the actors. One of the puppeteering the dragon comes in full black with Chihiro on the shoulder. I'm like, I love that. That's adorable. There's Yubaba, who I was really intrigued in whether they would make her a human or a puppet, especially because she has such a interesting design, which is almost like a little bit bigger than a human. I wondered if they would decide to make her a puppet. They go mostly with the human side of it, which I think did work, but don't skip out on making the giant version of Yubaba. The big face, which similar to the Haku puppet, is made up of different pieces, which form together to make a giant face version of Yubaba, and can easily whip out to reveal other yubaba, smaller yubaba, human, not human, spirit yubaba, but also not human, but human actor person. Yes. I love the makeup job they did on yubaba as well. Like, it looks stunning. There's the pigs, which is probably the simplest one that they do, just being these giant helmets, almost like 3 times as big as the actors' heads, which go over the performers. There's a lot of great magic tricks that they use throughout the show, turning people into pigs, and it is very efficient. I think the best puppet that they use in the show, the one that is just incredible and is a nice mixture between people and puppet, is No Face. Of course, No Face, if you know Spirited Away, goes through quite a big transformation, starting off as quite a slim spirit, but then going a bit mad when he enters the bathhouse. This is the most terrifying puppetry they do in the show, and I love how this matches the tone. It is terrifying. This absolute giant mass formed up of loads of different actors and puppeteers, all covered by black sheets to form this one being that looks so real. It's so impressive, you can barely tell that it is loads of actors forming together, and matched with the giant mask, which gets bigger and bigger as he grows and grows and grows. It is really, really intimidating. And this also allows for a really easy switch over between the giant one to the smaller one when Chihiro tricks him. There's a lot of other puppets that are done on long sticks to fly over, and a lot of the puppetry is done right in front of you. They don't try and hide the actors, they don't push them to the side, they're right in front of you, but they kind of just blend in to the ensemble. With the mixing of their physicality and their performance, and a lot of the smart choices in costuming, they really do blend together. Like the frog guy. I can't remember frog guy's name, but frog guy, that one. You know, little frog guy. He's a frog. I love little frog guy. Yeah, he's a little puppet. And the performer is kind of, I can't describe this. Hold on. And the performer is like, oh, yeah, this is how we're doing it. Okay. And the performer is like here with the puppet, like bouncing along. He's like a little frog with a little frog. That's cute. There's also like a more distant version of Haku's dragon form, and of course the different birds. Yubaba's bird that looks like Yubaba, and Yubaba's bird that is Yubaba. And of course, if they didn't have it, I would have rioted. They do have a full bodysuit version of the radish spirit. Yes! And he's so cute. He's so cute. It looks like an inflated suit that I want to go up and hug. I don't know what is more huggable, the Totoros in Totoro or the radish spirit in Spirited Away. Either way, I want to hug both of them. They look so friend-shaped. You can't help it when they are friend-shaped. So as you can see from a lot of this description, it is extremely accurate to the original. All of these designs are pretty much lifted. But there is so much creativity within that, especially within this set that is so reminiscent of the original designs in the film, but still gives way to recreating all the different moments that happen within it. It's flexible with this spinning, rotating panel where they can really quickly change little bits of set, allowing it to feel as expansive as the location in the film. There are some incredible pieces of design in this show, and while none of it feels unique to this version, none of it feels like it is their own idea, it's all a recreation of the film, it is still a joy to watch, and really thrilling to see how they achieve it. But I do think that is all it is. It is a recreation, and that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. Obviously, I think it does work, despite the fact it doesn't really adapt. But I do think that personally for me, Totoro was stronger, even though it was a recreation, because a lot of the puppetry and a lot of the recreations gave you a feeling that the film didn't. Because when I watched My Neighbour Totoro, I wasn't completely sold on it as a film. But then I watched it on stage. And on stage, when you're seeing this puppetry, when you're seeing this giant Totoro, when you're seeing all of this magic, you get the exact same feeling inside you that those kids are feeling. Something that the film, with its design, can do to a point. But I feel like there is an extra special layer of that happens when you portray that on stage and it's happening right in front of you. It's that childlike joy that makes Totoro work that lends itself to a stage adaptation. Whereas Spirited Away matches the film. And I think that's okay. I think that's good. It's very satisfactory and a treat to watch how it's done, but I don't think in the adaptation anything boosts it. And of course that's not a damnation, because I think there is so much to enjoy about this. But it's a very interesting thing about adaptation and talking about why one thing can work really well, and even if you do that exact same thing for a different piece of media, it might not work as well as the other one. Let's talk a little bit about this cast. So the thing about this production is that there is a constantly rotating cast. Almost every main character has about 4 different actors, so I can only really speak about the cast that I specifically saw, and talk about the different approaches that they take and why I think these really worked. First off, I actually want to mention the ensemble and a lot of the physicality that they had, because I think it was so important to make a lot of these characters who aren't puppets feel inhuman. We need to immediately see that these characters are not human. They are spirits. And there needs to be that really clear contrast between all of them and Chihiro. And I think this cast managed to achieve that through a lot of their physicality. I want to give special note to like the attendants, you know, the frog-like attendants, the ones that aren't frogs but are frog-like, with a more human appearance in general. It's through a lot of their movement and characterization that they really get that sense of inhumanity. Something being a little bit off about them, matched with their costumes, it really comes together for a full performance that really brings you into this world and perfectly contrasts them to Chihiro. Speaking of Chihiro, she was played by Kena Hashimoto when I saw the production. And I think she was a wonderful protagonist, really giving that sense of determination to save her parents, really portraying the fear and the anxiety that she feels. She's suddenly been pushed into this completely different world, having to just fight for herself. And doing it all without her parents, probably for the first time in her life. And you really get a sense of that pressure on her, but still of that fearlessness that really endears you to her. There's Romy Park as Yubaba and Zeniba, playing both of the twins and really giving an interesting contrast to both of them. Despite looking and dressing exactly the same, you can tell a clear difference between the two. And I love, especially as Yubaba, her power, her status, and how she holds that over everyone, especially Chihiro. There's a great performance from Hikaru Yumano as No Face. It's a very physical role. There's no actual, like, proper dialogue for this performer. So it's all done through the physicality, which is this very twitching kind of nature. He's wonderfully creepy in this role. You're never quite sure whether to trust him or not. And I think that this performance and a lot of the physicality helps to confirm that. Kotaro Daigo plays Haku, the servant to Yubaba, who has a very stern performance through this show, helping Chihiro. And you really get a nice sense of these two bonding and coming together. Overall, I think Spirited Away is a very pleasing production. I think as someone who is a fan of the film, I definitely enjoyed it. There's a lot to take away from this if you do enjoy the film. I think there is such a thrill of seeing a lot of these spirits and people come to life. And I think the story does work well on stage. It is definitely more of a recreation than an adaptation, and I think it does require a little bit of knowledge, at least on the plot, to better go into it if you are less familiar with the original story. So, what do you think? Have you seen Spirited Away on stage? What are your thoughts? Let me know all of them in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me out helps out the channel. Here's some links to some other videos on screen right now, and a link to my Instagram if you want to drop me a follow over there. But that's it for me today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!